representing the 47th Congressional District in Congress. And we're here today because Donald Trump, along with the help of congressional Republicans, is pushing an illegal, unconstitutional, and immoral scheme to choke off federal funding for basic services. Now, we all learned about the Constitution back in elementary school. I have two kids who are right now in elementary school, so I know that they learned this around this age. And we learned that Congress, not the president, has the exclusive authority to appropriate and spend money. So what Trump is attempting to do right now is blatantly illegal and is causing massive amounts of harm to real people, even with all the confusion of this week. Now, all week long, I've been hearing from my constituents who are anxious about the chaos and confusion caused by the White House's orders. But I want to recap briefly what's happened. On Monday, the acting director of the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, issued a memo ordering all federal agencies to, quote, temporarily pause all activities related to obligations or disbursement of all federal financial assistance. This created a widespread panic among the agencies and organizations across this country that rely on federal funding, including those fighting the fentanyl crisis, providing Meals on Wheels, domestic violence shelters, veterans health providers, firefighters, police, and so many more. And you'll hear after this from a number of representatives of organizations and the government that potentially are affected. In response to this order on Tuesday, 22 state attorneys general sued the federal government seeking a temporary restraining order. Seemingly in response to the outrage and outcry public pressure, OMB issued a memo yesterday, Wednesday, stating that the original OMB memo was rescinded. But then later in the day, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt tweeted that, quote, this is not a rescission of the federal funding freeze, it is simply a rescission of the OMB memo. The president's EO, or executive order, on federal funding remains in full force and effect and will be rigorously enforced. In response to this, late yesterday, a federal judge issued a temporary restraining order stopping the federal spending freeze from going into effect. However, as you'll hear, we are still uncertain of whether the White House, OMB, and the different federal agencies involved, one, will obey this court injunction in the long run, and two, what will happen once the stay is lifted next week. As a result, there's massive uncertainty and chaos and fear floating around. Now, the president's target, purportedly, is, quote, DEI and the Green New Deal. But let's be clear, this whole scheme is massively illegal. Congress made the decision last year, before I took office, to allocate certain funds to certain priorities. And in this country, the president is not a king. He does not get to choose which appropriated funds are distributed and which are not. Now, if he doesn't like diversity and environmental protection, that's fine. He can lobby Congress, which, by the way, is controlled by his colleagues in the Republican Party, to defund programs with diversity and environmental protection involved in those. That is how separations of power work. Unfortunately, Republicans in Congress have refused to stand up to Trump's blatantly illegal actions this week, so we're facing a constitutional crisis, one that, again, I would emphasize is immoral and that is causing massive amounts of harm to real people out in America. The White House's continued miscommunications have left our community in jeopardy. I've heard from constituents all week worried about whether their seniors will receive meals, if cuts are made to Meals on Wheels. I've heard from folks at UC Irvine who are anxious about different forms of research funding that they're relying on, including cancer research, clean energy research, and the like. I've heard from firefighters, police, that they're worried about their federal grants. The fentanyl crisis, fires, all this might be potentially impacted, both in the short and long run. This federal funding freeze and its disastrous rollout already have had horrendous consequences for Californians in need, and the planned budget cuts going forward, again, are illegal, but they will also be catastrophic for actual real people that I represent, including those across America as well. That's why I'm so grateful to have here with us today Orange County Supervisor Katrina Foley, Mary Ann Fu, the founder and executive director of OCAPICA, Connie Chung Jo, CEO of Asian Americans Advancing Justice for Southern California, who will share their stories about how their services would potentially be impacted by President Trump's proposed federal funding freeze. We have a number of other representatives in the room from nonprofits as well, and I want to thank them for being here. Now, I just want to emphasize, it doesn't have to be this way. Just a few weeks ago, when I was sworn into office, like everyone else serving in Congress, like the President of the United States, and like every federal officer that is leading these agencies, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Now, if House Republicans and Senate Republicans are willing and able to follow that oath that they swore to profess, to care about the people that they represent, their oath to the Constitution, they should stand up. This is not a partisan issue. It is about the rule of law. It is about following the Constitution and upholding the basic principles that we all learn about in elementary school. So I'm hopeful that my Republican colleagues will do the right thing here, protect the people they represent, and stand up for the rule of law and the Constitution. But with that, I want to invite up here Supervisor Foley to share her remarks about how these cuts potentially will harm the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pemberton. Good afternoon, Katrina Foley, Vice Chair for the Orange County Board of Supervisors. And while the Trump administration touts their recent stunt to freeze the government, unfreeze the government, freeze it again, we experienced this week a lot of disruptions, a lot of chaos. We were sitting in our board meeting on Tuesday and everyone was getting updates every hour. People not knowing how their grants would be funded for community services, for housing, for veterans, and it was just a lot of disruption. Their freeze on transportation and infrastructure projects can be essential for Orange County. We're looking at $517 million that's in jeopardy for the Orange County Transportation Authority. $77 million to improve highway traffic from the 57 freeway in Anaheim all the way down to San Juan Capistrano and the Ortega Highway. $100 million that we worked on over the last year to stabilize our coastal rail corridor and to put good sand on our beaches. This is a priority for Orange County. It's a priority for the whole state in terms of maintaining our coastal rail corridor. And $100 million is at risk. We know that AQMD has already, South Coast AQMD has already had their accounts frozen. A $500 million EPA grant that they had already started drawing down for implementation of that grant program, frozen. This will not be, they are not being allowed to access the portal at this time. This stunt undermines the core function of county government. Many of these programs, and I have a list that I got from our county staff, many of these programs have been programs that we've been implementing as a county for decades, over several administrations. As the congressman said, this is a bipartisan issue. This is not about partisan politics. This is about good government. This is about helping people, protecting the safety net, and making sure that those programs that most vulnerable individuals rely on continue. But let's just talk about the issue of narrowing. So I brought up at the board meeting on Tuesday all the list of potential categories, 2,600 categories of cuts. And then we heard the feedback saying, oh, it's just about DEI, it's just about climate. Okay, so let's talk about that. Taking the president at his word that it's only about those two categories, we are looking at $900 million in funding cuts to the County of Orange. So I asked our county CFO, give me a conservative estimate of what that looks like. What are the quote-unquote DEI initiatives? These include $520 million in funding at risk. And I'm just going to go through some of the categories that I have outlined by our county staff in this list. These include funding for school breakfasts for hungry children and meal delivery programs for seniors. This is something that's been going on for decades in our county and in our country. Adoption services and family self-sufficiency services. Adoption and foster care services are on the chopping block because they have some connection to DEI as part of the grant. Child abuse prevention, elder abuse prevention services at risk. Importantly, we know there's a housing crisis in our country, in our county, in our state. Housing choice vouchers to move people off the streets and into housing, to keep middle-class families in stable, clean, and affordable housing, and to keep seniors in housing. So this is a priority for us. Workforce Development Office, they have tons of programs that are intended to help people stay working so that they're not on the county welfare benefits, but those are at risk as well. Most egregiously, as a woman, rape test kits. are being discussed as being eliminated because somehow rape test kits are DEI related. DNA testing for crime prevention and trials, even trafficking and drug prevention resources, even Homeland Security grants that we receive through our Orange County Sheriff's Department are at risk and all in jeopardy. Look, I agree, and anyone who knows me knows that I'm all about government efficiency. Government needs to work better, it needs to be faster, more streamlined, and we need to be protecting the taxpayer dollars as best we can. I agree, we need controls, we need oversight. I will work with anyone. Democrat, Republican, Green, Libertarian, no party preference. I will work with anyone to make sure that we are efficiently providing county resources, delivering results, and making sure that our contractors and our employees are hitting their metrics and the standards of excellence that we expect as taxpayers. But to have a full-blown halt of services, a disruption of services from public transportation to child abuse, to senior meals, to housing for the disabled is just wrong. It's irresponsible, it sows chaos, and it actually is bad for America. So in these unprecedented times, the county is remaining steadfast in making sure we protect these programs, no matter what happens at the federal level, as best we can. And we ask and we plead with the president, please do not take away our safety net for our community. Do not take away the infrastructure grants that we are using to build an economy. And please work with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Foley. Appreciate your commentary there and your insights. I am excited to welcome up next Mary Ann Fu, head of OCAPIC, to share her remarks.
Thank you so much, everyone. We're a nonprofit organization and we receive federal funds. We receive federal funds direct through the Department of Health and Human Services to do behavioral health, as well as we receive federal funds through the county and state and cities. So what these federal funds do is that they really help community members and all community members. We serve everyone. And so they'll help on behavioral health. They help keep people who have been mentally ill and they're trying to recover. They keep them housed instead of being homeless. Work with a lot of homeless community members that just need a little bit of support at the time. It also helps on rental assistance for community members who can't afford rent here. And they're working 1 or 2 jobs. They just need a little bit of support. And it's also really helped for community members for job development. We have so many community members in Orange County who are taxpayers who want to work, and these funds support them. Now, what happened with the executive order when it came down, it was very general. When it said that it's going to impact federal funds and it's going to be a pause, we were all so confused, and it caused a lot of chaos and fear. We didn't know what was happening. Is this federal funds for just direct for nonprofits? Is it for the county and the cities? Is it for essential services? And even though there's a pause on that, or it was taken back, it actually is continuing, and we still fear for that. As a nonprofit, we're really worried. How will we serve community members? How will community members get essential services? How will we keep up with the infrastructure here in Orange County? And finally, what these federal funds do is that they help to save taxpayer money. They help with efficiency and effectiveness. They help prevent community members from overutilizing emergency services. They help community members to make sure they're not living on the streets. And they help people who are just trying to get their feet back on the ground, who are working multiple jobs. They help them with savings. And so it's a really incredible investment that saves us in the long term. And we just need to have more information, and that the executive orders, when they're released, there are so many that are released, it's really causing confusion and fear, and we're seeing that community members are not coming into services because they're so afraid that how does this impact them? Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Appreciate that perspective. I want to invite up next Connie Chung Jo from Asian Americans Advancing Justice for Southern California.
Thank you very much. Asian Americans Advancing Justice Southern California is the nation's largest legal service provider for Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. And we serve over 10,000 clients a year here in Orange County and in our Los Angeles offices. Ours are free legal services open to those who cannot afford an attorney for essential legal needs to make sure that their rights are protected. When I heard about Trump's executive order, immediately my first thought was, what happens to the millions of dollars of federal funding we need for specifically our housing protection and our domestic violence clients? We have a multi-million-dollar HUD grant called Eviction Protection. It is on the list of the chopping block of those that are being scrutinized under Trump's order. That grant allows us to serve clients who are in eviction proceedings and may be subject to price gouging, illegal evictions, discrimination. And for those clients who cannot afford the hundreds of dollars an hour or the thousands of dollars it requires to fight back against these things in the legal system, they can come to us to do that. Without these services, we will have vulnerable, low-income clients who will be subject to unfair and illegal practices and could be unhoused. When I think about our domestic violence clients, we're talking about individuals who need a restraining order to protect themselves from harm from their abusers. Because of what is being threatened with our federal Victims of Crime Act funding, we might not be able to help those clients who need to just be protected from their abusers, who want to have a fair shot at keeping custody of their children when they are being harmed. This is what is at stake. These are not political issues that are being threatened here. These are basic, fundamental needs that every human, every American has. The right to have a home that is safe. The right to not to be harmed by an abuser or by a partner. And that is the type of legal services that we provide that are being threatened right now. And the chaos that this is creating, the anxiety for us, our staff, and around the nonprofit world, it is unwarranted, it is unnecessary, it is obscene, and it is inhumane. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Connie. I think what you've heard here is really a microcosm. We are hearing it from around the county right now. And earlier today, I was visiting UC Irvine. They are facing the untold amounts of federal funding freezing if this is allowed to take hold. Just yesterday, I sat down with the fire chief of the Orange County Fire Authority. They have a number of grants that will impede, if they're frozen, their ability to fight wildfires and help our citizens out here in the event of a fire. Police, different services, mental health, veteran health care, Meals on Wheels, domestic violence, seniors. You've heard this all. We are going to have huge impacts here in Orange County. You can multiply those around the country. And so we're pleading and urging President Trump and his administration, the head of OMB, to do the right thing, to follow the law, to do what's right for Americans, including here in Orange County. And we also want to urge House Republicans, Senate Republicans to step up and also do the right thing, because what President Trump is doing here is blatantly illegal, and we need to stand up and actually assert our right as a co-equal branch of the federal government. With that, I'd love to take any questions you might have or direct them to any of our guests today. Yep.
Hi, so can you clarify for some of our listeners and viewers how, say, Meals on Wheels or Head Start would have these DEI like how do these two go together? Because that may seem confusing.
Yeah. So there's two aspects here. One is the temporary pause on federal funding affects potentially all federal funding out there throughout the entire United States. And that is a blanket freeze that was stayed by a federal judge. But that stay will, I believe, be lifted next week. And at that point, all federal spending will be impacted. On the DEI and the Green New Deal, these are much broader, and I think we're all digesting how broad these are, but they go into things like, if even like you're looking at maybe targeting certain types of neighborhoods or homes, or the Meals on Wheels has certain directives to try to, increase meals to certain low income or minority neighborhoods, that would be probably subject to DEI. They're casting a very wide net here Similarly with the Green New Deal, I was surprised by some of the programs that I was informed are probably going to be affected at UC Irvine that are really only tangentially related to clean energy or environment. But again, they're being very overbroad right now. I think we're all of us having we're really learning right now what might be impacted and to what extent. But I'd love to open that question up to anyone else here.
Yeah, and what I can tell you is, based on our identified list from the county, diversity, equity, and inclusion includes targeted for seniors. You know, age is a diversity, equity, and inclusion category. Targeting culturally specific meals for seniors. That's also technically a diversity, equity, inclusion category. So we are looking at all of the places where we've applied for grants and there has been a request to identify what is the diversity, equity, inclusion program that you are going to use the funds for, and those are the ones that we've identified more than $500 million in risk to the county programs. And so you have to remember over the last 4 years that to be eligible for a lot of these grants, you had to address diversity, equity, inclusion. And so that's why those are at risk. As it relates to the infrastructure projects, to be eligible for a lot of this infrastructure funding over the last 4 years, and maybe even beyond that, we had to include how does this impact sea level rise if it's a coastal grant? How does this impact climate change? So any of those grants that had that information in them, we believe they're clawing that back. And the rail corridor grant is a perfect example. That grant is really tied in with the president's initiatives regarding infrastructure.